My name is Caitlin. I am 42 and I live in the quiet suburbs of Minneapolis with my husband, Brandon. On paper, I am a full-time wife, the kind of woman neighbors wave to from their driveways. But on the other side of that neat, ordinary life is another truth most people don't see. I am the founder and CEO of SilverMed, a medical equipment distribution company that brings in millions of dollars each year. My official salary is about $145,000 a year. Brandon has no clue. We met at a friend's party when I just turned 30. He had that easy warmth people mistake for depth. Attentive, flattering, someone who noticed small things. The way I gripped my coffee with my left hand. How my eyes brightened when a favorite song came on. I thought then that a man who could notice those things would be the kind of person to carry me through a life together. We dated for nearly a year and married, believing the future would be the soft, steady unfolding of two people who loved one another. At first, the belief felt deserved. Brandon was loving, funny, and generous with compliments, but the veneer cracked slowly. Small excuses turned into patterns. He resisted changing jobs despite being underpaid. He bristled when I offered suggestions. When I casually mentioned an opening at my company, an administrative role with a salary that would have doubled what he earned, he reacted like I insulted him. "You think I can't do it on my own," he snapped once. "I don't need my wife to get me a job. Don't treat me like your employee." It was the first small, hot shard of something harder to come. I was stunned. How did the man who once rehearsed the way he'd say my name become someone who read help as humiliation? I kept trying. I thought if I shouldered enough and softened enough, we could hold the life together. The house, the routines, the polite facade. Every month I transferred $400 into his account as a living allowance. He spent it in weeks and then complained about prices. I knew where some of it disappeared. Sneaker drops, video games, impulse buys, the trivial thrills of someone unmoored. But I was exhausted. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the widening silence between us. He never asked if I was tired after a 14-hour day. He didn't notice when I stayed up polishing a pitch at 3 a.m, or when I flew to 2 cities in a week. To him, I'd become the woman living on his ledger, not the person running a company. Then there were the small cruelties that, over time, pile like stones. My mother, Frances, once came over to help tidy the house on a day I had back-to-back virtual meetings. The moment Brandon arrived, he dropped his keys and said something that made my mother's smile freeze. "Another stranger in the house. I need my peace." I rose from my chair, furious and trembling. "She's my mother. She came to help." He shrugged. That exchange felt like the first real crack. A fissure where everything that had once been held together started to shift. We continued to share meals and the same living room, but the life inside the rooms cooled. Hugs stopped being spontaneous. Good night became a fragment of habit. Random intimacy dried to rote. Brandon's anger sharpened. Small household things, a towel or a remote, provoked storms. He blamed me for the broken coffee machine even when he'd been the last one to use it. He began to twist my words until I felt like a criminal in my own home. The more I tried to explain, the more he seemed ready to punish me for reasons I could not parse. I felt like a maid, then like a ghost. Once, after a brutal day of meetings, I walked into the kitchen, shoes still on, when Brandon held up a shirt and snapped, "This isn't ironed. Do you ever do anything right?" I forced a laugh and swallowed the anger. For years I'd been negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. Now I was being reduced to whether I could operate an iron. That exchange stayed with me in the quiet hours. The gulf between who I was and how I was seen. When I fell ill, it crystallized everything. I collapsed at the office. The lights went hazy and the room tilted away. I woke in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and a Dr. I.S. measured voice telling me I'd fainted from exhaustion. Tests followed. 2 days later, the diagnosis landed like winter. A tumor on my pancreas. Early stage, manageable with immediate treatment, the doctor said. But hearing the words, I felt a different panic than fear of the disease. I was terrified of facing it alone. I texted Brandon that I was in the hospital and needed to talk. There was radio silence. He didn't pick up. No calls, no messages. I began treatment without him. Chemo arrived like a slow chemical tide, my hair thinning, my taste dulling. Every mirror turned into a stranger. I told no one the truth about where I was. I didn't want my mother to worry. I let them think I was on a business trip. 2 weeks passed like a long, white corridor. Then Brandon arrived. Late, hands in pockets, expression distant. He placed a folder on the bedside table and said without warmth, "I've filed for divorce. The house and car will be in my name. I think that's fair." He even suggested with dreadful casualness that my life might not last. I remember the room tilting again, but this time with anger, not fear. He didn't come with sympathy. He came to claim. The next days unfolded with a fierce clarity. I called Eric, my CFO, and the man who been loyally discreet about the truth behind the company's legal structure. We used my mother's name for years as a legal shield, a modest public face for the woman who preferred to stay out of headlines. Eric listened, then said simply, "Tell me what you want done." When he arrived at the hospital 2 days later, he brought neither flowers nor sentimentality. He set a leather briefcase on the tray and asked softly whether I was certain. I was. The plan had to be swift, demoralizing, and clean. I wanted the moment of power to be mine, not out of cruelty, but to expose what had been built on deceit. At 8 a.m. on Monday, I signed and sent a termination of our supply agreement with Vital, the small logistics company where Brandon worked. That partnership accounted for over 60% of Vital's recent quarterly revenue. By 3 p.m., the CEO of Vital called me, brief and incredulous. I told him the truth in calm, controlled sentences, that an employee had shown disrespect toward female colleagues and misused company assets. When he asked for a name, I said, "Brandon Scott." The pause on the line felt like the exact sound of an empire starting to melt. When Brandon got home that afternoon, he looked pale and panicked. He opened the fridge for water, and the single sentence he said, "I got laid off," was all confusion and accusation. I walked to my desk, took out an envelope and placed it in front of him. Inside were divorce papers and terms that required him to vacate the house within 30 days. The house, legally and practically, was mine. I'd bought it long before he'd demanded to be added for the sake of appearances. He flipped through pages, numbers, and conditions that were cold and real. He touched the mortgage section and said, "This can't be real." I watched him flail in the domain of what he thought was his. There was no love left in the moment, only the weight he had taken for granted. 3 days after he received the papers, the hospital phone rang near midnight. He pleaded. His voice broke in a way I'd never heard from him. "I lost everything. The house, the job. Please, give me another chance." He sounded less like the person I had married and more like someone who finally understood what he'd been supported by. I didn't cry. I was tired in a different way now. Tired of being invisible in my own life. Tired of being assumed small. "You had a decade," I said, calm and blunt. "You chose how to live it." He mentioned a name, Alyssa, and the line went silent for a breath. I told him I'd already been contacted by Vital's CEO about an internal complaint that revealed an affair with the intern. The breath on the other end became a confession. He stammered. I hung up, blocked his number, and asked my lawyer to include a no-contact clause in the proceedings. I also began a suit for breach of marital duty. Minnesota law allowed for emotional damages in circumstances like this. Eliza Harper, my lawyer, came to the hospital with stacks of evidence. Screenshots, timestamps, geolocations, flirtatious messages, photos from late-night hotel meetups, all pointing to one truth I'd sensed for months. I felt relief that was not vindictive but solid, proof to anchor the shape of what would follow. When I went home on release between treatments, I told Eric to prepare a careful handover. I needed to step back. The body had demanded it. He appointed a replacement COO who could steady the company while I recovered. I moved out of the house that had been full of small betrayals and into a smaller lakeside place in Duluth. Quiet, modest, a refuge where the sunrise arrived in slow, honest color. Brandon's downfall was quick and public in the small network of our industry. Vital cut ties. His termination and the scandal's details spread among partners, whispered and then recorded in HR notes that made hiring impossible. He sold the car he once boasted about and took a night shift job at a delivery center. Calls from collection agencies became his new company. He moved into a cheap apartment in Brooklyn Park and lived in the echo of what he'd once taken for granted. Alyssa disappeared from social media. Eliza later told me her family had settled privately to avoid litigation and retreat from embarrassment. I didn't celebrate their retreat. My satisfaction was neither cruel nor petty. It was a private rebalancing that said I would no longer be the person other people scorned or used. Months rolled by and my treatments ended on a clear September morning. I waited for the Dr. I.'s words with the kind of quiet terror that makes the world stop. "Your tests show you're completely clear," he said. I squeezed his hand instead of speaking. The relief felt like air after diving, raw and almost indescribable. When I returned to Silver Med, the reception was humbling in its own way. A team meeting, applause, Eric handing me a mug that read, "Welcome back, boss." The office felt different, steadier, more honest. I had returned not just to work, but to a self-ID let get swallowed by compromise for too long. In the months after, there were questions from men who wanted to date, old friends who wanted reconnection, and whispers in the industry that I'd emerged from trial stronger. I declined invitations. For a while, I wanted only the slow work of healing. I bought a small lake house where the mornings arrive in a hush and the evenings sound like birds and water. It isn't grand, but it's mine, and it is quiet. One weekend on the porch, Eric sat beside me watching sunlight walk across the lake. He teased, half smiling, "Have you thought about getting married again?" I sipped my tea and smiled back, gentle and honest. "Not right now. Maybe someday. For now, I'm learning how to be enough for myself." What I learned is not some aphorism about resilience that reads well on a mug. It is more practical than that. Resilience is the slow accrual of small acts, removing yourself from patterns that harm you, asking for help, setting boundaries, refusing to let the world define your worth. I had given love my best efforts once. When it failed, I did not shrink or apologize. I named what I needed, and I chose myself. People sometimes ask whether I regret hiding the company from Brandon. No. I wanted a life that was mine without spectacle. If anything, I regret being too hopeful that kindness alone could change a person. There are some lessons only learned through upheaval. I did not lose everything. I lost a marriage that had long been dying, but I gained clarity, health, and a quiet house by the lake. I learned how to put my dignity where it belonged, not sold for peace, not bartered for convenience, but protected as a foundation to build anew. In the end, the story is not about the man who broke me. It is about the woman who refused to stay broken. I chose myself. I built a new life, slower, truer, and full of small, steady mornings. And for the first time in a long time, I wake up and look forward to a day that belongs to me.